Inherent in the notion of preventive cardiology, with respect to coronary risk factors at any rate, is the item of education. Education of the people at risk, which of course is a population phenomenon. And our next speaker, Dr. William Haskell, who's Associate Professor of Medicine at Stanford University, is involved in a large project that is dedicated just to that issue. The proposition that the public health approach to coronary risk factors is through education and in the research mode to show that that in fact can be accomplished, that there can be coronary risk reduction. This is the 5-city study at Stanford University. Dr. John Farquhar is the principal investigator of that. I think there's similar, perhaps larger in scope, but similar in design to the Minnesota Heart Health Study, and I believe there's one in Rhode Island. Richard Carlton is the principal investigator of. Dr. Haskell could be on this afternoon's program in cardiac rehabilitation, because I think that's where his major acquaintance with Herman has been, in the cardiac rehab arena, and Dr. Haskell's been in that for many years. Indeed, even though now in preventive cardiology, where he is actively involved and will present this data from Stanford, he continues to be a co-director of the cardiac rehabilitation effort at Stanford. So that we are most pleased that Bill Haskell can be with us, and in this area of preventive cardiology and the notion of reduction of coronary risk in a public health way, we'll be interested in the present status of the data, which I believe is about 4.5 years down the line now from the inception of the study. Dr. Haskell.
Thank you, Dr. Moyer. It's indeed a pleasure for me to participate in this symposium honoring Herman Hellerstein. I feel like a junior colleague of Dr. Hellerstein, even though our association goes back over 20 years now. In fact, Herman might remember, I surely do, 20 years ago this month was my kind of indoctrination to the technique of Dr. Hellerstein. 20 years ago this month, I had the opportunity in my first job working for Dr. Sam Fox in the Public Health Service to travel with Herman to Israel to review the possibility of joint research projects in coronary heart disease. Also, while in Israel, I was sent with him to Sweden, where he was then participating in a meeting on the work capacity and its testing held at the Karolinska. And during that time, I became very familiar, rooming with Herman, sharing the same room, eating with him, traveling with him. Became indoctrinated to this technique and characteristic that's already been referred to, that I kind of classify as inquiry, interrogation, and confrontation. However, I feel very fortunate in a sense that I was exposed to it in a broad sense, not only in terms of that technique addressing clinical or scientific issues, but issues of everyday life, including social issues in Israel, including religious issues in Israel, and including social medical issues in Sweden. And I think that intense exposure made me realize that this was an approach that Herman used to first make people take a stand. You can't be around Herman without taking a stand. And secondly, once you take that stand, you better be damn well ready to back it up. And that's the confrontation. And indeed, in Israel, I saw this occur as we walked the wine steward. Herman grabbed him by the back of the coat, brought him back, gave him a glass of wine, and said, "You taste it." And it was simply to see whether the individual stood by his original recommendation. The maitre d' said the wine is not bitter, it's just dry. Herman accepted. In Stockholm, and I do have a scientific presentation. You may not want to hear it. In Stockholm, Herman received a telephone call late one morning, and it was from the Professor Gunnar Bjork. And many of you know that Professor Bjork, we spent some time previously in Cleveland, at that time was a major clinician, politician in support of the Swedish approach to medicine, in contrast to the approach in the United States. And he invited Dr. Horstein to sit in on the grand rounds being held in a magnificent old amphitheater at the old Lazaretto Serafima Hospital. And Professor Bjork made the fatal mistake, as I saw it, in his critiquing the case before Dr. Horstein did. This case that was presented was a case of a young woman in her 20s who had been hospitalized in about 7 or 8 hospitals in Sweden in the last 3 to 4 years. In each case, she had been hospitalized for maybe a week to 10 days and always discharged without any definitive diagnosis. You know, shortness of breath, lightheadedness, dizziness, these types of syndromes. After Professor Bjork critiqued the case, Dr. Horstein proceeded to ask some very critical questions about types of medical examinations or tests that had been performed or not performed. And then he proceeded to diagnose the case. In fact, this wasn't a problem of a patient, it was a problem with a form of medical care delivery, the Swedish form of socialized medicine. And that simply, there was nothing really wrong with this woman other than the fact that she needed some attention. And in Sweden, one of the easiest ways for her to get attention was to be hospitalized and to be taken care of by all of these handsome young Swedish physicians that had been produced by the system. And therefore, it was really a change in the system that needed to be made rather than a change in the patient. Well, needless to say, this was simply a confrontation with Professor Bjork regarding not the patients of the system. Needless to say, we spent about the next 5 hours kind of cornered in a restaurant in Stockholm with Professor Bjork trying to convince Dr. Horstein that indeed he was not right. But it is that experience that has made me appreciate Dr. Horstein professionally for this approach. Confront people, make them take a stand. Once they take a stand, then you better be ready to back it up. On a professional note, I'd like to comment is that, and pardon me, I get slightly choked up on it. In the early 1970s, we had a young daughter that was severely handicapped because of brain damage. And several years later, my wife decided that she would like to have another child. And the decision to have that child was the result of Herman's consultation and advice that in the long run, for the quality of life of our family, it would be substantially improved. I wonder if I could have the first slide, please. Now, if there's anything dealing with Herman Hellerstein, if a little bit is good, more is better. So instead of having one child, we ended up with twins. Now, neither one is named Herman. But, in fact, one would argue that they shouldn't have any Herman genes. But, and I'm sure that the one here on your left really doesn't. She is too passive and really takes things as they come. The other one here, she either has Herman genes or at least a fair amount of Hellerstein DNA. Because turns out by the second year of education, a significant reduction in both Gilroy and in Watsonville. When we look at high-risk individuals, you can see that there seems to be even a greater difference, and these differences were statistically different. This study had a lot of advantages, but a lot of limitations. These are small communities. We focused on a design that looked at a single group of people over a 4-year period, in which didn't totally represent the community at large. In the late, as a result of that study, mid-1970s to the late 70s, we began to organize what has turned out to be the Stanford 5-City Project. It was actually initiated in 1979. It's carried out in Central California, and there are 5 communities involved, 3 reference or controlled communities, Modesto and the Central Valley, and 2 communities along the south central coast, San Luis Obispo and Santa Maria, and a intervention community which really incorporates the Monterey County area. There's 2 primary sites being Salinas, which comes very close in terms of demographics to Modesto, and Monterey, which is much closer to San Luis Obispo and Santa Maria. Now, this study really differs from the 3 community studies in several ways. One, we are doing community-wide morbidity and mortality surveillance in all 5 communities to look at what is happening relative to coronary heart disease morbidity and mortality, as well as stroke mortality. We're looking at a much broader application of intensive instruction in self-management skills through community organization. I'll come back to that in a little bit. Dealing with larger communities, we have a concerted effort, in this case, in terms of dealing with health professionals, physicians, nurses, dietitians, and the rest. We have a major youth program. In the 3 community study, we were dealing with individuals in the age 35 to 64. Our surveys cover individuals down to age 11 now. So we have a cohort following 11 to 74. And we're collecting data not on only the total program, but components of the program in terms of trying to determine cost-effectiveness analysis. This is the original design. It looks reasonably complex, but just let me say that these are project years, and you can see where we are right now in terms of 1986 out into this area. What we have done is, first of all, we take random samples of households, and we develop a cohort that we have followed over the years. This initially was 600 individuals in each of 4 communities, or 2,400 individuals, and approximately every other year we have gone back to survey them to look at attitudes, knowledge, behavior, and cardiovascular disease risk status. Also, to get a better handle on not only what's happening to people that we see regularly, but the community at large, that every other year we also then do an independent sample, and we go out and select another set of households, recruit individuals 11 to 74, and view them as a best estimate of what's happening in terms of risk factor status of the community at large. We are doing epidemiologic or morbidity and mortality surveillance in the communities, and we back this up. Actually, we now have data going back to 1977, and we're carrying it through. Community education here shows 6 years of education. As of Monday of this week, we have received the pink sheets from a continuation proposal, which indicates approval, in which this study is now designed to go through 1990 with 8 years of education and an additional independent sample and another assessment of the cohort in 1989, 1990. One of the real advantages for us is that since we collected our initial data concurrent with the 1980 census, we can not only compare our results in Monterey County with our control communities, but with other similar counties in California. So basically, this has now turned into be a 10-year trial and with 8 years of education. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on methodology, but the measurements in each city that indicated is morbidity and mortality surveillance, evaluation fatal cardiovascular disease. We do this by death certificates. We do it by hospital discharge indices. These then are all validated in terms of, we do independent review by nurses of all of these records. We do code assignment. We have a physician panel review. We collect additional information in terms of out-of-hospital deaths, in terms of family interviews, coroner records, and hospital charts. This in itself has become a major project. We're dealing with 16 hospitals in these 5 cities with about 400 physicians. On average, so far, we've been looking at about 1,200 death certificates, investigating around 600 deaths a year. Hospital chart reviews about 3,500, and we abstract separately about 1,800 charts a year. In terms of the surveys, we collect kind of much of the standard information of demographics, medical history, health-related history. We collect a lot of information on community organizations and community patterns for health delivery outside of the regular medical system. We're collecting 24-hour diary recalls, formative information in terms of interest in the health areas. Medical evaluation, blood pressure by several different techniques, expired CO, low-level fitness tests on the bicycle, heart rate related blood samples, primarily for lipids, lipoproteins, and thiocyanate to verify smoking status, urine samples, and so forth. The education model that we use is primarily based on the theoretical kind of constructs of Albert Bandura at Stanford, who's kind of the father of behavior modification and self-efficacy, and on Everett Rogers, who's now at USC but was at Stanford. That is area is primarily related to the fusion of innovation. We use kind of a communication behavior change model that says that people learn how to develop new skills in health-related behavior, that those can have an effect, that these changes may occur most effectively if you develop a community support and an environment, physical and psychological environment that supports such changes, and that through the fusion using major community organizations, that this interaction with the other two should provide substantial power for health-related behavior change. The target behaviors are pretty standard in terms of major risk factor reduction. We are, as I indicated previously, focusing on trying to get some changes in medical practice in terms of screening, case finding, and more active intervention. We're involved in changes in nutrition, smoking, not only to prevent or to do smoking absence, but to prevent new smokers, particularly in the younger individuals, exercise, stress management. The educational components, health professional education, electronic mass media, television and radio. We feel that we're probably as good, if not better, than anybody in the country in doing electronic mass media in the health area now. I'm not taking credit for it, that's my colleagues, but I think the types of products and the strategies that they're using are really in the forefront. Printed mass media, school programs, employee groups, health organizations, and then kind of some community-wide activities that I'll comment on in a second. What about, when you look at results of this kind of a study, you'd like to be able to look at it in some way, the same way that you might look at a drug study in terms of dose response. Are the people really getting the drug? Are they really getting exposed to this education? These are data that we just put together as we completed the 5th year of education. And this looks at education exposures, and this one is to radio and television, and this is the number of exposures per adult. We know to say what the penetration is of each television spot on the average or program that goes on, and you can see that
resources in the community. But also we try to do a lot of teaching here, demonstrating the difference between saturated and unsaturated fat on a TV spot. And we run all of these bilingual arrangement. This is a Spanish, slide off of a Spanish-speaking TV spot related to encouraging the Hispanics in the area to return to their traditional diet. Exposure in terms of newspaper, we have physicians' columns, articles, ads, a lot of things. You can see the exposures per adult that over a year we're getting 40 or so different pieces of information per adult in the paper. And they include such things as announcements of programs. This is a walk-run program we run every year in Salinas on the Moves, co-sponsored by local agencies. This is an advertisement sponsored by the pharmacies in terms of a whole series of what are backpacks, what are exercise packs, and so forth. So substantial exposure. In terms of print, other, these are substantially smaller scale. These are all related to the production of print material by our own group. And we don't read backwards in California, but these are just a series of books that we've put out, and in many cases these have been mailed to as many as 20 and 30 households, 1,000 households in a mailing. There's about 60,000 households in our target or survey area. And so staying healthy was the initial kind of risk factor guide, and then very specific books. In addition to just books, we've also been involved in a variety of other techniques to try to induce behavior change. Our experience, as probably anybody here who's worked in this area, is that people really don't like to read very much. And short messages to the point are very useful. One of our more valuable campaigns relative to cost is the refrigerator poster idea that was developed. And basically this was a series of up to 12 tip sheets in which we mailed the initial instructional tip sheet and a heart-shaped magnet to the household with instructions to put it on the refrigerator. So they were very, very limited in the message, very concise. And then monthly for the year, a new tip sheet came. They were instructed to change it on the refrigerator. That on surveys of this, 87% of the individuals, after like a 2-month period, had their tip sheets up. We don't have data at the end of 12 months, but a very high penetration rate at relatively low cost. These are the kinds of things that have been developed for that approach. The other piece of process evaluation that came up in about the second year of this project was there were a lot of people out there that wanted to make changes, such as losing weight, such as stopping smoking. But an example would be like in losing weight. When people were asked were they overweight or not, in 90% of the people that said yes, they said that they would like to lose weight, and better than 75% of those who said they would like to lose weight, they said they didn't want to go to a class, that they wanted to do it on their own. So this generated a series of products that really aid the individual in making the health-related change on their own. The first of these was a weight loss correspondence course, which was called Drop It Off, in which correspondence was sent to the mailbox. And our experience in 4 different settings now is the Drop It Off program, weight loss by mail, has the same weight loss and weight maintenance effect as any course class that we run when you randomize patients to these approaches. The second one was a quick kit, which is a self-help quick kit for stopping smoking, and it kind of is a series of get ready to quit, now's the day, we quit, and kind of continue. So these are, in any one sense, is not the final answer, but surely have been very effective. And then in terms of exposures to direct educational programs, these would include things like major seminars, and you can see that the exposure for adults early on was very low. We're getting up about to a point exposure per 0.25 exposure per adult by the 5th year. But these include major community-based activities. One of the things we found out that we 1985, we moved in a major way to working with the various industries in the community. And one of our first major program was an exercise challenge where the various work sites are, in a sense, competing within work sites and across work sites in terms of a increase in physical activity. Focus is primarily on walking during lunch and this type of thing, and with evaluation. So these are relatively large major programs. We're involved in the extension of the American Heart Association approach to the Healthy Menu program, where now we have about 40 restaurants in the target area actually providing a heart-healthy menu on most of their meals. So it's a very broad program. A great deal of effort has gone into it. We work very closely with all of the community agencies, the hospital, the medical association, work sites, schools. We've run a number of programs in attempting to change the curriculum in schools. Some of the more expensive, more effective has been the so-called class program, which is a peer counseling program where 9th graders counsel 7th graders relative to not take up cigarette smoking. And 3 years later, there was shown to be close to a 40% reduction in the rate of cigarette smoking in experimental versus control schools. And that program is now used in a number of schools throughout the country. Are we having any effect? Well, sometimes you can wonder. My primary responsibility for the last 12 or 13 years in these projects has been responsible for the measurement component. And sometimes I wonder if we're looking for needles in haystacks when you try to detect changes in health-related behaviors and biologic measurements in a community-wide sample. But there are some very encouraging signs. These are the data on percent change in cigarette smokers in the cohort, the people that we've been following year to year. And C1 is baseline to C2. So this is in 6 years of education, 6 months of education, 28 months, 52 months of education. The change in the percent change in cigarette smoking, a 10% reduction, 20 to 30%, in the treatment towns versus the control towns, showing that by the end of our kind of 3 years of education, well, more like 4 years of education, there's a significant decrease. One of our, in a sense it's not a problem, but from a research standpoint it's a problem. With the secular trends going on related to health-related behaviors and risk of coronary disease, we're really having to show not just a change, but an incremental change over already what is occurring in the community at large. This is probably a much more important display of cigarette smoking. This looks at the independent samples. In other words, we haven't seen these people before when they come in with representing a cross-section of the community. And this is kind of a survival curve looking at the probability of continuing to smoke if your smoker is starting at baseline. And for the first kind of 300 days here, this is when we were doing surveys at baseline and started the education program at about this point. And you can see that as we progress through around 1,600 days, that the slope in terms of the reduction in rate of number of cigarette smokers or the percentage of cigarette smokers is significantly less than in the intervention than in the control community. So this is somewhat what we're seeing nationwide. This is what we think the added educational effect is at the present time. My comment on all of this smoking is validated by expired CO and thiocyanate, that if you say you're not smoking and you have to have a CO under 8 or thiocyanate under 100. Otherwise, if you have both of those, you're classified as a smoker to avoid some of the problems in reporting that we know exist as a result of such studies as the multiple risk factor intervention trial. Changes in blood pressure, just quickly look at diastolic blood pressure. Again, in the cohort, in the treatment versus control, one would expect in this look at the source of this decrease, there's internal validity. There are more people who were not on antihypertensive prevalence of a patient or individual being on antihypertensive medication is now significantly greater in the treatment community as compared to the control. And when you look at people on antihypertensive medication in treatment versus control, there is a substantial difference in the magnitude of blood pressure lowering. Either they're adhering to medication or the other effects are producing it. Also, if you look at kind of a frequency plot, you see that much of this blood pressure lowering is a result of people who are really hypertensive coming down to more normal blood pressure levels. The diet area is one of major concern. First of all, from a research standpoint, you are reasonably reliant, if you're just looking at what people eat, on self-report. We don't have any thiocyanate or CO kind of measures really to monitor specific food items. But this comes from our 24-hour recalls, and this looks at treatment versus control, and it goes from the baseline out to our fourth year of evaluation. And one can see that there's kind of no difference in solid foods. We have been obviously promoting the idea of reducing red meat, reducing eggs. It's interesting, there's a similar report about a 30% reduction in egg consumption in both treatment and control. Whole milk, greater reduction, lard and butter. And we have focused on areas like cheese where there's hidden fat, suggesting substantial differences. Foods that we've tried to promote, more complex carbohydrates, low fat and non-fat. You can see again in the control community almost more reporting of switching or use of low-fat milk. But we have really promoted the idea of non-fat milk, which is still used by a small percentage of the population, suggesting that things might be going in the right direction. In terms of nutrients calculated from the 24-hour recall, and this is using a computer program from the Nutrition Coding Center in Minnesota, that there is a kind of like a 10% reduction reported in calories, 10 to 15% reduction in fat, total fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol. And you can see that these are marginally different because of trends going on, or at least being reported in the controlled communities. Changing lipids is in our major, what I would call, setback today. This is looking at the changes in plasma cholesterol. And these kind of goes through the years of education, looking at the cohort here, here, and here, and the independent sample. We focus on the open bars for just a minute. These are the changes in milligrams per deciliter, subtracting treatment from control. So this is the net difference between treatment and control in all of the individuals in each of the communities. And you can see that there's a 2 to 4 milligram per deciliter. I'm sorry, that this is control and treatment. I'm sorry, this is treatment here, the open bars for everybody. One of the problems is simultaneously with trying to lower LDL cholesterol, we are having people stop smoking and reasonably successful, and that tends to lower, increase HDL cholesterol. Also, we're promoting the use of antihypertensive medications, which tends to have an influence on increasing, in some cases, LDL and total cholesterol. So we're currently analyzing data in different ways. was primarily focusing our education program in the nutrition area in terms of all new components. We have had only small changes in weight in treatment versus control. We have not had any significant effects on high-intensity exercise in the treatment groups, but substantial improvements in reported total caloric intake and moderate intensity exercise in treatment versus control. Just finally then, looking at the local logistic of risk, and we use actually two approaches, but if we just take like 28 or 54 months out here of education, one can see that this is the total mortality. There looks like about a 10% in coronary heart disease, about 14, and that in the independent samples, minus 24, minus 21, and out of here, minus 19 or minus 14. Our projection over the original course of the study is that for this type of approach to probably have any utility, that we needed to make changes in the 20 to 33% change in these risk scores. So at the present time, I would say that we're reasonably optimistic that at least in some behaviors, community-wide intervention does play a role. I won't spend the time in talking about some of the specific programs that may have the greatest impact. However, I would say that we have a real challenge right now, in my view, in terms of having a major impact on the cholesterol levels of the general public. I think this is particularly important given the plans of the National Institutes of Health to develop a national cholesterol education program. Just as a kind of follow-up in terms of where some things might be going from here, as Dr. Moyer mentioned, this study is one of 3 studies of a very similar design, the other 2 being carried out in the University of Minnesota with Dr. Henry Blackburn and in Rhode Island in the Pawtucket area. That is not a collaborative project, but the methodologies have been developed in a way in which we will be able to pool our data across those 3 projects. The other thing that you will begin to hear some about is a program that was introduced on April 1st by the Kaiser Family Foundation. Kaiser Family Foundation with Dr. Albert Tarloff, who was chief of medicine in Chicago up until recently, have decided that over the next decade they're going to put more than 50% of their capability into a national program of community-based health promotion. And this community-based health promotion idea comes substantially from our experiences at Stanford. But instead of just focusing on coronary heart disease, they're also going to deal with cancer prevention, accident prevention, substance abuse, and teenage pregnancies. And they are in the process of forming a consortium of private foundations to support this. And I think unofficially right now, they probably have at least $10 million a year committed to the program for at least the next 5 years, with tentative plans to extend it for another 5 years. The process is to set up 4 national resource centers, one located in each of 4 regions in the country, and then to fund from communities who apply to the program to develop community-wide health promotion programs in any one of those 5 areas. From our standpoint, that is very useful, because one of our frustrations is that a large percentage of the
questions for Dr. Haskell? Dr. Liebman.
In the interest of time, I'm going to go right to the competition. This is obviously one of the best designed programs of its sort in the country and the world. And I suspect the pink sheets will keep on coming favorably for the next decade. My big complaint, therefore, is why age 25 to 74 for all that education? What's the matter with infancy? Early childhood, shouldn't they be?
Some of the data I presented was 25 to 74 because some of the measures over 4 years in children are confounded by their change in age and body size. The 5-city project only answers half of your complaint in that it does go down to age 11 and as far as our surveys. However, the education program is designed such that the implication is for all ages. I mean, there's nothing that constrains our education program, and the messages for mothers who are pregnant, for young children in terms of case finding of hypercholesterolemics or diet apply to them. Our survey methods are restricted, or surveys from 11 to 74. Some of our analysis go simply to adults because of compounding factors in kids.
Short question, Gene. Yes, Dr. Hirsch.
Tell me how you measured the lack of intervention in the control populations. What was your baseline in terms of the intervention rather than the outcome?
Yeah. Our involvement with control or reference communities is simply, first of all, definition of no intervention is that we do not actively intervene. But that also means that we do not actively intervene to prevent other organizations from carrying out their own health programs. So if the state wants to come in, they can. But we have documentation of the magnitude of that intervention in that we monitor all of the TV logs from all of the stations in the controlled communities. There's only 2, so it's reasonably easy. We monitor all the newspapers. We monitor what goes on in the community colleges. So we know the degree of intervention. And in fact, one of our selection problems is that, as you've seen, that there is a fair amount of health-related information going on independent of us in the controlled communities, producing like the smoking change, I'm sure.
Thank you, Dr. Haskell. Our last speaker this morning is Dr. Ralph Paffenbarger, who's professor of epidemiology and community health at Stanford, and is also visiting professor of epidemiology at Harvard University. Dr. Paffenbarger does have some Ohio roots. He's an undergraduate of Ohio State University, a native born in Ohio. Subsequently attended medical school at Northwestern, where he was a classmate and I believe a roommate of Ted Mortimer. Is that correct? Who, as you know, is our professor of epidemiology and biostatistics here. So there is this connection. Finally, his connection, at least in the cardiovascular area of Ohio, is his brother Tom, who lives in Norwalk, Ohio, I believe, has been a very, very active lay member of the Northeastern Ohio, the AHA affiliate of Northeast Ohio, was recently chairman of the board of directors. So he does have roots here. Now, he is going to speak of a subject that there is certainly interest, some confrontation perhaps. The specific confrontation, though, we won't get into, and that is the virtues or vices of marathon running, which I see Herman immediately started. There is some conflict between Herman and those of us who believe in long-distance running, if for the soul, if not for a body, at least for soul. Dr. Paffenbarger, as many of you know, had been investigator of some very historic and important projects. Most recently, 10 years ago, the San Francisco longshoremen study that showed beneficial effect of increased activity, or at least risk of inactivity. And more recently, his ongoing study, a sort of a historical prospective study of 16,000 plus Harvard College alumni, where data continue to show a protective effect, independent of other coronary risk factors, of a vigorous lifestyle. In particular, he's paid attention to one of the objections or one of the confrontations of the data, namely there might be self-selection, selection, contamination of the data of the benefits of exercise. And he's, I think, as far as can be done in our lifetime, I personally believe that he's controlled the possibility of inherent athleticism in his cohort of study. Finally, however, he does, I would think, would admit bias with respect to exercise. He was very happy to come here to participate, being a friend of Herman's in this celebration, but by chance the Boston Marathon is next Monday, and Cleveland's closer to Boston than San Francisco. I think this will be close to your 20th Boston, 18th Boston Marathon for Dr. Paffenbarger. So he is a little bit biased. Finally, really finally, you may notice, but he'll keep his coat buttoned, I suppose, maybe now that I've mentioned it. He has a silver buckle. This is awarded to people who finished the so-called Western States foot race, a 100-mile race across the Sierra Nevada that ends at Squaw Valley. And as I recall, if one finishes that under 21 hours, one is awarded a silver belt buckle. I think Ralph has several, 5 of them. Dr. Paffenbarger.
lifestyle and overeating were detrimental to health. In 1700, Bernardino Ramazzini studied the health status of sedentary tailors as contrasted with physically active runners, who probably were messengers. Both low and high extremes of exertion were unwise, inviting ill effects, he thought. But since tailors could not expect to get enough physical activity while at work, they should be advised to take physical exercise at any rate on holidays. Let them make the best use they can of some one day, and so to counteract the harm done by many days of sedentary life. An 1863 report by Dr. Edward Smith on health of London tailors this time showed little improvement in the nearly 200 years since Ramazzini observed their plight. Smith did not pinpoint cardiovascular or other diseases, but his tables of age-specific mortality rates showed sedentary tailors about 50 to 75% greater mortality in middle life than did physically active agriculture workers. Following up on Herrick's clinical diagnosis of coronary heart disease in 1912, a chap by the name of Headley contributed in 1939 an analysis of over 5,000 Philadelphia, California cardiovascular deaths during the period of 1933 to 1937. Seeking to evaluate the accuracy of diagnoses, he pointed to differences by age and occupation. For example, death rates were higher among professional and managerial men than among skilled and unskilled workers. And he implicated sedentariness as a predictor of high risk of heart disease. Well, on and on, you know the story of Paul W. White and Eisenhower, and you know the autopsy results of the marathoner Clarence Lamar, who incidentally won the Boston Marathon 7 times. He was second twice, and he was in the first 10 15 times. Paradoxical discussions of exercise and mortality often hold that sedentariness shortens life expectancy, yet hesitate to infer that adequate exercise extends survival. Observations on Oxonian, Cantabrigian, and Ivy League oarsmen of the university boat race, which considered college-age exercise but not contemporary or lifetime activities, highlighted this debate of many years and have provided conflicting results relative to any protective effect against CHD or any deferral of mortality. The epidemiologic work of recent time, contrasting physical activity and incidence of coronary heart disease, originated shortly after Hitler's war, when J.N. Morris of England undertook studies in the London transport industry. He compared conductors who climbed up these 9 steps from the first level to the second floor, chasing customers, to drivers who sat on 4 wheels and turned the 5th one. And he found that the conductors had half the death rate, half the disease rate of coronary heart disease, as did the drivers. And what disease they had occurred somewhat later. less active men was confined largely to those categories of coronary death described as sudden and unexpected, namely death within the first hour after initial symptoms. Looking at the various risk factors of the disease known in the early days, you can see that with or without the usual predictors of coronary disease, those men who were most active had essentially half the risk of coronary mortality of their fellows who were the walking bosses, the crane operators, the jitney drivers, and the forklift operators. No exception for roughly half the risk of death among the more active group. Special interest is the relationship between energy output among individuals who return to the job after a first heart attack, where you can see that, again, the risk of mortality is the secondary prevention I'm talking about now. It's roughly half that among the more active as compared with the less active men. Putting all those characteristics together, factoring them out, and looking at the rate of reduction of coronary mortality associated with increased levels of work activity, you can see that there's a steady drop with increased levels of energy output. The reference level here is of about 4750, which approximates the energy output of a standard business week, 40 hours sitting at the desk or acting as physicians, as many of us do. Morris realized that occupational activities would very shortly fail to provide the kinds of prevention that might be appropriate relative to cardiovascular health. And he began a study in 1968 in which he compared the coronary disease experiences of about 18,000 men among British civil servants who on a Monday completed a diary for the prior Friday and Saturday, a work day and a free day, in which they reported on all the things they were willing to talk about on a 5-minute by 5-minute period. These men were followed for both disease and death up to now some 13 years after the first observations. I'll talk here briefly about the observations in the first 8.5 years of follow-up. Among those 18,000 men, roughly 1,000 developed the first clinical attack in these 8.5 years. And you can see that those men who were described as vigorously active, representing 12% of workers, and representing men who were liable to achieve an energy output of 7.5 kilocalories per minute or more over a minimum of 10 minutes in this 48-hour period. These VE men, vigorous energy men, have roughly half the risk of disease and non-fatal coronary disease of the men who did not expend energy at that level. 2- to 3-fold difference. An interesting finding in his first 8 years of observation, which has persisted, is that among men who were especially active, there is no increase in risk of coronary disease, non-fatal coronary disease, with advancing age. Realizing that activity can be confounded by a variety of characteristics, that active people can smoke less, that they can be more lean, that they have different lipid patterns and the like, he looked at various attributes among his VE and non-VE men. First, he showed that in successive increments of time, the difference of 2- to 3-fold between these groups persisted. The first 3 years, the next 3 years, and the last 2.5 years. The point being here that if this were selection, one might expect to find a big difference here with a smaller difference as time proceeded, but this was not demonstrated. Looking at a few of the potentially confounding factors, here the cigarette habit, you see that irrespective of smoking status, among the never smokers or those who smoke cigarettes in large quantity, the difference between the active and less active men continued at about 2- to 3-fold, favoring vigorously active men. Here we look at body mass index, the most lean, the most obese, and find again seen, there is a continuing difference favoring vigorous activity in leisure time. He ended up then with a new hypothesis expressed here as vigorous exercise is a natural defense of the body with a protective effect on the aging heart against ischemia and its consequences. I turn now to a study that is of long range. It's a former student from the University 28 kilocalories per kilogram per week have about one-third greater risk of cardiovascular death of their comrades, representing about 35% of the total who expended more energy. The difference holds at each age class available for study. Men 35 to 49, men 70 to 84, and the two oldest age groups, the difference between least and most active men is of the order of 50%, and in the younger men, the difference between least and most active rates is of the order of a third or quarter. Now, we've talked largely about death from all causes, and you see a steady decline in death rates with increasing levels of energy output from less than 500 to more than 2,000 kilocalories per week. Also, a steady decline in cardiovascular disease, but deaths from other causes, although significantly associated inversely with this level of energy output, do not show much change between the intermediate and most active group. There is some element of selection in these data, quite obviously. Men with advanced cardiovascular disease or with cancer are going to select themselves to be in this category, so that if we eliminate these men, which represents 15% of the group, we find a significant fall in total cardiovascular, and although not shown here, respiratory deaths, with no difference, no association between level of energy output, cancer, diabetes, other natural causes, suicide, or accidental death. Turn now to 10 years of observation in these men, following them for these same kinds of activities for their risk of fatal and non-fatal coronary heart disease. And you can see that men who climbed 50 or more steps per day had about 80% the risk of coronary disease of men who climbed less. And that men who climbed at least, or walked at least 5 blocks, essentially half a mile each day in their leisure time, had about 3/4 the risk of coronary disease of men who walk less far. Light sports play has no relationship, at least in these data, with coronary morbidity or mortality, but men who play vigorous sports, at least on a weekly basis, have but 3/4 the risk of coronary disease of men who do not. Putting all of these data together at the division of 2,000 or more kilocalories per week, you see that the more active have but 61% the risk of coronary disease of the less active. Looking at age classifications, again, in the Harvard alumni, 2,000 kilocalories or more energy expenditure each week, walking, stair climbing, working in the garden, sports play, is associated with about 2/3 the risk of coronary disease of activities less demanding, expenditures of less than 2,000 kilocalories per week. And again, this holds for the young, the intermediate, and the older age groups. Again, as for total mortality, we see an inverse association at each age class between level of energy output and coronary heart disease. At any level of physical activity expenditure in these 17,000 men, take 3,000 kilocalories, for example, men who include strenuous activities in their weekly program have a lower risk of coronary disease than men who level of energy output, with decreased amounts of cigarette smoke, there is a decreased risk of coronary disease. Matching physical activity against blood pressure levels, again you can see that each of these characteristics makes an independent risk of this disease, and obviously point to different kinds of interventions had a 25% lower risk of death if they had gained more. If men who lost one or both parents early had parents living to age 65, their own risk of death might have been 13% less. So that's the clinical attributable risk. Now the community attributable risk here in the last column represents estimates that take the prevalence of these characteristics into consideration. They indicate what percentage of risk might be spared in a community or population if the adverse characteristic listed were converted to more favorable characteristics. The risk of up to the question of indolence versus vigor, of obesity versus trimness, of hypertension versus normotension, omnivorous gluttony versus abstemious diet, cigarette habit versus smoking abstention, alcohol use versus social temperance, compulsive behavior versus relaxed adaptation, fearful inadequacy versus stalwart self-reliance. The evidence that exercise makes an important contribution to health is being rediscovered today in a world rapidly becoming accustomed to overnight interactions of large numbers of people on an international scale. The public is educating itself at a pace and to a point where it needs and surely would like the advice and support of the medical health practitioners, which I think is getting very little of at the moment. Interventions through reduction of hazards and attention to lifestyle, exercise, smoking cessation, weight control, coping with stress, leads us to persuade citizens to achieve self-preservation by improving the quality of their ways of life. I think I'll stop. Thank you very much.
Other questions, or perhaps two, for Dr. Pattenbarth? I would ask one, Ralph, do I recall correctly that in your longevity studies that the vigorously active men cohort group has a 50% greater risk of self-destruction, suicide?
No, this compilation I mentioned in the audience here are either University of Pennsylvania or Harvard College attendees, alumni. We'll forgive both of them. But in this population, which is a little different, well-educated, extremely intelligent, affluent, like the rest of us here, the death rates from almost all causes are essentially three-quarters the death rates for age-comparable U.S. males at this time, except for suicide, which is 2.25 times higher than in age-comparable America. Now, I do not know about the contingent of those foreign compared to their best activity.
They're not just poor losers.
Follow-up question frequently asked is, can we generalize from observations on humankind? The usual answer I give is that we wouldn't have undertaken the study if we hadn't decided we could generalize. Perhaps they are not a good model of the bottom 15% of society, but I am quite confident that they represent the kinds of people that we see in our social activities today and in our practices as physicians. Another frequent question that's follow-up with this thing, and I'll stop here, is how much time are we going to spend being active in this extra year and a quarter? The estimates provided by actuarians.
Wives frequently ask that question.
They do. Not just because they run the washing machine those more than usual too. The answer to that question is that for each hour, once you get to the point where you're reasonably active and presumably fit, for each hour that you were active, you seem to gain that hour over and at least one, maybe two more hours to boot. So for every year that you were active, you did that suggest, for example, that the best way to avoid coronary heart disease is to return to Harvard questionnaire. Well, that's not so. This book is very easy to read. It's lots of writing. It just says snide, goes out of context, said, and it's definitely wrong. He contradicts his however many first 7 chapters, his final chapter, where he decides that an active, moderately active, fit way of life is the way to go.
I think we... Thank you very much, Ralph. We will break for lunch now. Those of you who are staying here on the 5th floor for lunch have been so notified, and that's in T501, just down the hall. The rest of the folks who have to wander out a bit, there is a cafeteria in this building and one at University Hospitals. Plus, I think you've all received, or there are available at the desk, flyers indicating things within easy walking distance. We'll reconvene at 1:20.